Final Fantasy XV is still, to this day, one of the most divisive installments in the series, and of course, I love it with all my heart. Over the course of my 4 playthroughs on my dad's PS4 back in high school, my own PS4 Slim, my PlayStation 5, as well as my most recent playthrough on the Series S for this video, I've dumped well over 200 hours into 15. And contrary to what I was afraid of going into this video, this game still holds up 8 years later. Does this mean this is going to be an easy video to make? No, not at all. You know how in grade school your teacher would come back after having a substitute and say some shit like, "Never in my entire teaching career have I ever gotten a note this bad." Well, never in my entire career on this hell site have I come across a game with so many flaws, so many annoyances that bother me so damn much. And yet, I will defend this game like it was my own fucking flesh and blood. 15 is a game that comes with a lot of baggage and caveats. Too many for most. And I honestly can't really blame them. Over the course of this and the next video, because yeah, this shit is too fucking big, I had to chop it into 2 separate parts, you will begin to understand that this game is legitimately cursed. But to properly explain why 15 is so... 15, I need to give you some backstory. In 1987, I'm kidding, of course, if I have to hear another YouTuber tell me about the development of the first Final Fantasy game, I'm actually going to fucking... But all jokes aside, I do need to retell the tumultuous development of Final Fantasy XV as fast as I possibly can. In 2006, Square Enix announced that their next mainline Final Fantasy, 13, would be a part of a sub-series with 2 spin-offs set in the same universe, known as the Fabula Nova Crystallis. Similar to the Final Fantasy VII compilation and the Evenis Alliance, if that's how you fucking pronounce it. I wouldn't know, I haven't played 12. These 2 spin-offs were known as Agito 13, a PSP action RPG directed by Hajime Tabata, the director of Crisis Core and my personal hero, and the other was Versus 13, a grand-scale PlayStation 3 exclusive directed by the one and only Tetsuya Nomura, the main character and monster designer for the series since Final Fantasy V, the creator of the entirety of Kingdom Hearts, as well as the Fire in My Loin. All of this sounds like a great concept for a new sub-series meant to entice completely different fans across different platforms. Because even though 13 and Versus were both going to be released for the PS3, the latter was a completely different kind of Final Fantasy. From what little we know, it was going to have a very, very dark story with the entire kingdom of Insomnia worshipping the goddess of death. It was going to have a much more modern setting, with the city being visually designed after Shinjuku, and the main party was even wearing some very Nomura-esque streetwear. But there were a few snags for both Versus and 13. It's since been revealed that 13 was going to be on the PS2, but development eventually shifted to the PlayStation 3, costing the team well over a year of dev time. Then the new proprietary engine made solely for development on 13, known as Crystal Tools, caused significant delays, postponing the game's release even further. Meanwhile, Versus wasn't doing much better at all. Its development had been halted to make way for 13, according to Nomura. But as time kept passing by, the situation seemed more and more dire. Eventually, 13 finally released in 2009 and 13-2 in 2011, and yet, there was still no release date for Nomura's game. Hell, Versus hadn't even begun full production, once again according to Nomura himself. The man is self-reporting. Mind you, the first trailer for Versus released in 2006. That is 5 years on ice. Agito 13 was announced at the exact same time and was already released back in 2011 under the new name Type 0. An absolute masterpiece of a PSP game, our hero Tabata strikes again. Versus was effectively on life support, with gameplay images shared in Japanese magazines like Famitsu, as well as the occasional trailer being released. But unsurprisingly, 6 years after its initial announcement with very little substantial progress, the game had kind of been internally cancelled in 2012 since the next-gen systems were right around the corner, rendering a last-gen exclusive game obsolete in the minds of Square. Okay, this is the first appearance of the curse. However, Square wasn't going to just forget the project outright. They decided to remove Nomura from the director's seat and shift into a new thing titled, I don't know, fucking Kingdom Hearts 3 or whatever, and bring an entirely new creative team to turn the ship into a different direction, announcing that Versus was now going to be the next numbered entry in the franchise, 15 at E3 2013. Another victim of the curse. Yeah, somehow Final Fantasy XIV released in the midst of all this, and that was its own sort of shit show. Square was just really struggling during this era of the franchise, now that I think about it. It's not uncommon for projects to be revised or completely change course while maintaining some sort of aspect of the original concept. Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man films has some lines borrowed or even adapted from James Cameron's rated R script. That is a real thing, by the way. But what makes 15 and its development so unique and weird is that almost all of Versus 13, which was about 25% complete, would be taken and reintegrated into 15, but with an entirely new vision with my hero Hajime Tabata taking over directing duties, as well as a new story. Even the music that was complete for Versus was used in 15, which explains the Kingdom Hearts sound of the battle themes since those were composed by longtime Nomura collaborator Yoko Shimomura. Even this very small 5-second POV shot of a young Noctis running to hug his dad was reused in 15. Still, to this day, after what little we've learned about Versus 13's development, it's hard to entirely separate it and Final Fantasy XV, especially since so much was taken from that original game. But ultimately, it's a completely different game wearing the skin of Nomura's original concept. Oh, what about Nomura in Kingdom Hearts 3? That's fine. It's totally not going to come back into play later on. History lesson over. You can close your textbooks. So now that we know everything about everything, how? How do you make a game that lives up to 10 years worth of hype? Simple answer, you don't. For the past 8 years, 15 has been criticized for a myriad of issues. Some are ridiculous, most are valid, all of which we're going to get into. But most of its issues stem from the story, which is going to be our ideal starting point. If I say seg, you say way. Seg. Way. Seg. Way. Here's the quickest synopsis I can muster. Prince Noctis of the Kingdom of Lucis, set in the city of Insomnia, what the actual fuck, is sent to another kingdom, Niflheim, to marry his childhood best friend and bride-to-be, Luna, as a part of a treaty between the two kingdoms. However, Niflheim, specifically Chancellor Ardyn, used this treaty signing as a ruse to destroy Insomnia and kill King Lucis, allowing Ardyn, who's secretly an immortal ascendant of Noctis, to kill Luna, take both the crystal and the throne for himself, as well as cast the world into eternal darkness. So Noctis and his entourage of Prompto, Gladio, and Ignis have to seek the favor of the 6 summons or gods of Eos, as well as the power of the crystal, in order to bring light back to the world. This really makes no fucking sense unless you played a Final Fantasy game. The only thing is that to use the power of the crystal, a debt must be paid to the last summon, Bahamut. In this case, the debt is that Noctis has to sleep for 10 years inside of the crystal, allowing Eos to be overrun by Ardyn and his army of demons. Bahamut was just really lonely, and he really just needed a sleepover with somebody. Eventually, Noctis returns from his long slumber, spends a final day with his friends, and then sacrifices his life to stab Ardyn in the dick, returning the world back to normal and dying in peace alongside Luna. Fucking hell. There's some smaller plot points and characters that I didn't mention, like Gentiana, who's eventually revealed to be the summoned Shiva, nor others like Aranea, Kor, Ravis, and Cindy, all of which kind of play a quintessential part of the story. But for the most part, that's the gist of the narrative. 15's story is best described as quaint. For a modern Final Fantasy game, it's awfully simple and very short, only coming in at about 16 or so hours without rushing. Usually there's some sort of organized religion or themes of faith to be had here, but there's not really any of that. But what I personally really love about Tabata's games is the characters. The games that he directs excel when it comes to the interpersonal connections made with the main party, and I adore the main cast of 15. They're the strongest part of the game, hands down. It's pretty much the one thing that everybody can agree upon. That friendly road trip feel is one of the most unique parts of what makes 15 what it is, and helps it to stand out amongst all the myriad of other fucking games in this franchise. Even though the open world is completely missing from the second half of the story, the bond that our 4 boys have is the heart and soul of the game, which is exactly what you want in any sort of party-based RPG. Ardyn is such a good villain, and the twist that not only was he behind everything, but that he's an immortal Lucian who was never able to become king is such a good reveal near the end of the game. I will never forget how surprised I was by that reveal the first time around. He doesn't have a ton of screen time or a real clear-cut goal besides fucking with NOCTIS and eventually becoming king, but it helps that I enjoyed Darren DePaul's performance a ton. The same man who voiced J. Jonah Jameson in the Insomniac Spider-Man games? That guy's got range. I appreciate how much the dev team just allowed Ardyn to be just a sick fuck, turning Ravus into a demon and making NOCTIS fight him, or him stringing up the corpses of NOCTIS's friends and family over the throne. Seeing a decaying King Regis and Luna just strung up by chains was so fucked up. But then there's the guy from Kingsglaive. I think he's voiced by Aaron Paul. I don't know why he's really here. I didn't like NOCTIS very much, my first, second, or really third time playing the game. He's not a particularly interesting character, but he's not really supposed to be. In the universe, NOCTIS is like 19. He's supposed to be apathetic, a bit standoffish, and even a little whiny. It's what makes his arc of accepting his place as the King of Kings so important. Over the course of the game, and especially after the 10-year time jump, NOCTIS begins to become more reserved but firm, caring but calm, very much like his father. And it's here where the dev team did something particularly interesting. At random points throughout the story, there's minor dialogue choices for NOCTIS. Some missions are even entirely built around what can be said in dialogue. Occasionally they can add a new side mission or change your main task, but most of the time you'll decide between having NOCTIS be nice or a bit of a dick. The main thing is that it doesn't really change the overall game itself. There aren't branching stories or anything here. Usually your rewards are XP or AP to level up your characters. You could chalk this up as an attempt to keep players invested in these slower parts of the game, or even Square trying to tap into the appeal that some Western RPGs have. But with some of these choices, it sort of cements how much the past few months have changed NOCTIS. The most obvious being the political negotiation of terms with the leader of Altissia. NOCTIS from the beginning of the game would not do that shit at fucking all. So by the end, when he eventually returns from his slumber and is a completely different person, it feels like I, the player, had a small hand in guiding him through that change. It's brilliant. I love it when games are able to tell their stories through gameplay. However, the biggest complaint that's perpetuated about 15's story undeniably is that it's unfinished. And while I wouldn't quite describe it that way, it's very obvious that Square wanted everyone to watch the Kingsglaive movie, as well as be excited for the Season Pass DLC, which was advertised at launch. To be fair, I still haven't seen Kingsglaive, nor do I plan on changing that anytime soon, and was able to understand the overall plot of 15 enough. Again, it's not an overtly deep game. Everything that's pertinent to the main story is covered through flashbacks and exposition. Now, some of those were patched in, specifically the scenes later in the game with Gentiana, and the reliance on clips from the movie as flashbacks is a little glaring. Same with the CGI trailer that they used for a dream sequence. These look completely different from the in-house pre-rendered scenes, so it's just a little bit jarring, but that is the nitpickiest nitpick of the nitpicks that there is. The main issue outside of the existence of Kingsglaive is that each of the other party members have entire character arcs that start off screen. Gladio just ups and leaves the party following the Titan fight, Ignis loses his eyesight in Altissia, and Promptos is the most glaring since he's knocked off a train by Ardyn and goes missing for 3 chapters, only to come back right before the time jump, now having learned that he's an Imperial Magitech dude. This is pretty bothersome and very obvious once you notice it. Again, I wouldn't quite describe it as incomplete, but there's a clear lack of individuality without the story feeling like it's setting something else up. I don't mind single-player games having DLC or expansions, but it would have been nice if 15 felt a lot more independent. While Gladio's arc about learning to be NOCTIS' shield is the most frustrating in the main game since that really does happen off-screen, and it never really feels like it ever gets resolved, the game still covers the other 3's arcs well enough, and concludes them in short but natural ways amongst the group throughout the conclusion of the 3rd act. It's one of the reasons that the ending scene chokes me up so fucking much. Don't get me started, man. Every time I see Luna die in Altissia, I get so fucking sad. The scene of Noctis trying his best to reach her, only for her to disappear in the water, is so fucking good that it completely makes me forget that it's almost entirely ripping off Final Fantasy VII. This might not have as much weight as losing a party member, and it would have been better if Luna had some more time to be integrated into the main story, rather than just working behind the scenes, but it's still a beautiful moment that's so well executed. Noctis and Luna's love story is very much seen as a negative thing. And yeah, well, I'll admit that they don't have very many scenes together, and I wish that they were able to build a natural sense of chemistry. Had 15 adapted the opening of Verses where the two meet at the treaty signing, I think that this would have fixed the problem entirely. However, 15 isn't a love story, it's a tragedy. Luna and Noctis already love each other well before the game starts. 15 is not about Noctis learning to love Luna or vice versa. It's about Ardyn taking Noctis' family away, his father, his fiancé, and almost all of his friends. Of course, it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Again, I'd have loved to see more scenes between the two of them having a nice dynamic. I eat that shit up. However, I love that, for both Luna and Noctis, it's not about the length of time that they spend together, but how much that they cherish it. Those are literally Noctis' final words before he dies, that he cherishes the short time he was able to spend with his father, his friends, and Luna. And that fucking ending, ugh. The credits playing alongside a slideshow of footage that are unique to your playthrough will never cease to make me feel nostalgic for a game that I just finished. Florence and the Machine's cover of Stand By Me, as well as her original song I Will Be, will never cease to make me feel something. It's a bit of a shame that her song Too Much Is Never Enough didn't get to be included in the game and is just on the album. That song is the auditory equivalent of a bowl of chopped onions. Oh, the fact that right before the final fight with Ardyn, the game forces you to select one picture to memorialize your entire journey. And initially, it frames it like it's this cute character moment for the congratulations scene, but then Noctis shows it to Luna in the afterlife. Then there's the after credits scene where Noctis finally admits his feelings to his friends during their last night together before they know that he has to kill himself. Oh my fucking gosh. It's so damn fucking good. I don't fucking care what any of you say. If I hear any slander, I'm invading your fucking home. 15 sometimes works in spite of itself, but damn it, it works. Penny pinching DLC be damned. Tabata knows how to make a damn good game, and this is just that. 15 may not be the longest or the more in-depth story in a Final Fantasy game, but I still love it. It's got that nice sincerity and heart that makes the bittersweet ending hurt all that much more. Personally, I don't really mind the game becoming linear near the end of the story, since we're still going to different locations like Tenebrae and Niflheim, and the linearity sort of allows the game to hone in on the story completely. Although I can get why this is a big issue people had with 15. Having a massive RPG pretty much center on an open world with a story about 4 friends on a journey around the country makes sense. So to just remove that part of the game halfway through can give a bit of whiplash. Like, once you leave for Altissia, you can never return to the open world until after you complete the game. There is a mechanic where you rest at hotels and rest stops. You can call Umbra, Luna's magic dog who shows up periodically, and he'll transport you back in time to before you travel to Altissia. It doesn't really make much sense at all, but it was added to allow for exploration during the more linear parts of the game, and it was added in a patch in response to 15's criticism, which is going to be a very, very common theme here. I would have loved to explore Insomnia near the opening of the game, like shown in the promotional material for Versus 13. The closest we get is the Citadel Courtyard as the game installs, which is just borrowed from the Platinum demo, as well as the expanded Destroyed Ruins at the end of Royal Edition, that's mainly just swarming with high-level demons and side quests. Especially since 15 was sold as a game set in a more modern-day setting than fantasy, it would have been nice to explore a city that's styled after Shinjuku. Of course, that doesn't mean that the cities that we do get to explore, like Lestalem or Altissia, aren't also great, each of which has their own entire look and culture, which was sort of surprising. They even have their own music, it's so fucking adorable. EOS manages to be a beautiful, expansive world with lots of different biomes and areas that's sort of held back by how segmented it is. The open world teeters on the edge between a beautiful landscape filled with things to do and a large, barren wasteland that's not fun to explore, and this is solely due to the traversal. Open worlds aren't just about collectibles or fucking Ubisoft watchtowers. It's about how you get from point A to point B. The Yakuza series is known for having a pretty limited stamina bar that runs out far too quickly in my opinion. You can upgrade it, but it'll take a little bit before you can do that. However, the map is so small and so densely packed that this never becomes more than a slight nuisance that you'll eventually get used to. Spider-Man is... well, it's fucking Spider-Man. The traversal is what most people go to those games for, but 15's traversal isn't really fun, nor is it satisfying, and it's somehow the entire crux of the open world. There's a lot of conflicting information on how large the open world of Final Fantasy 15 is, but suffice it to say, EOS is really fucking big, and NOCTIS' stamina bar runs out pretty fast, so the regalia is pretty much required, and it kinda fucking sucks. The car is on rails, it goes slow as shit, and is autopiloted for the first 2 to 3 hours of the game by Ignis. Of course, this is all conjecture from me, but it's kind of obvious that the car wasn't built to be fun, but out of necessity. The focus was entirely on transporting the player while wowing them with the beauty of 15's world, but as a result, the car is stiff and very awkward to control, mostly whittling down to holding the right trigger and pressing X to park. What makes this such a glaring issue to first-time players is that, again, 15 is a game that relies on its traversal. So for the main way to get from one city to the other being this, becomes a bit underwhelming. I guess there's chocobos, those are a lot of fun, but they're locked behind an optional side quest that most people will probably miss their first time around. So at launch, this was all you had. Thankfully, the alternative regalia modes were patched in, and they basically fix it, and I love them so much for it. The Type F is so damn fun to fly. It's a little awkward to get in the air and to land, but it's so impressive to see the mountains and terrain up close, and I don't know, man, there's just something about flying cars that's just undeniably cool. Meanwhile, the Type D is everything the regalia should have been. It's surprisingly fast, can go off-road, and can even jump, which makes traversal much easier off-road or not. Sure, it's kind of ugly, not really a huge monster truck guy, and there's lots of invisible walls and the game will just reset you if you drive in a town wrong, but that's the facade. These two fixed 15's traversal 10 fucking fold. Because once you're able to finally enjoy the process of driving from one town to the next, you're also able to appreciate how much 15 really has to offer. In most other games, a gigantic open world would eventually become a hassle, but I kinda love how much 15 just leans into how big it is with its gameplay systems. Of course, there's a day-night cycle where demons come out once the sun goes down, enticing lower level players to find somewhere to stay until dawn. But once you're level 40 or 50 and have weapons like the Ring of the Lucy, which completely obliterates lower level enemies in one shot, you can pretty much ignore the system and go out whenever you want. Except, instead of automatically leveling up, when you obtain XP, you can only go up in levels when your party rests for the night. It's a great way to entice players, regardless of skill or level or difficulty, to interact with other mechanics like camping, cooking, and Pronto's pictures, all of which would be overlooked by most in a different game. And it's done in a way that is so damn satisfying. Let me put it this way, if GTA or Saints Row asked me to fill up my fucking gas tank, I'm chucking that disc out of the window. But when 15 does it, it feels like the game is forcing me to look away from the long list of quests that I have to do and smell the roses. Of course, that doesn't mean it's perfect. The gameplay loop in 15 is not without its many issues. So, for example, let's say you want to customize your car. Well, you're gonna need a shit ton of gil to buy the stickers and designs that are spread out all across the different shops in EOS. But to afford that, you're probably gonna have to do some hunts and sell the treasure. Along the way, you'll most likely come across some side missions, like Taka asking you to buy him a tomato, or you'll even stumble across an Imperial base. Completing that base will reward you with something, most likely an optional boss fight, or even a unique car part like this one did, allowing you to change the regalia to the Type F, giving you the ability to fly. this is pretty much what you're going to be doing outside of the main story. Despite what I'm going to say, this sort of extra content was able to keep me investing more time into 15. Every RPG has stuff like this. Kingdom Hearts has optional bosses, past Final Fantasies have ultimate weapons, but while 15 has both of those, especially with the Royal Edition update, majority of the side content whittles down to fetch quests or kill the thing. Occasionally you'll come across one with a bit more depth or character focus, like gardening with Iris, helping Prompto confess to Cindy, or even cooking with Ignis, something that I've never come across before in this game. But those are few and far in between, or are even co-opted by marketing. This is going to be really short. The amount of in-game marketing 15 has is fucking insane, and I feel like the FCC is going to shit themselves. Between Cup Noodles getting an in-game store, an outfit, and a side quest, Coleman having branded chairs at every single campsite, and even Luna's dress being made by Vivian fucking Westwood. This is up there with those Alan Wake Verizon ads. There are a few collaborations with other games like Terra Battle, which I've never heard of, Final Fantasy XIV, and even Assassin's Creed? But I decided to not play those this time around. The Ass Creed missions were time sensitive, but since I played them years ago, I still have the costume, which I guess is pretty cool. And I don't really know anything about Terra Battle or A Realm Reborn. But again, outside of these select few, most of 15's side stuff just ends up being more 15, which was serviceable back in 2016. Back in high school, when bang for my buck was really important, lots of extra stuff to do was great. Hence why I ended up spending 72 hours in my second playthrough. But now, as an adult who's seen just how obnoxious and bloated open worlds can really be, 15 side missions, from requests to even dungeons, are mostly filler, solely meant for you to keep spending time in the world. None of it's really bad or offensive. For most first-time players, I'm sure they'll get a kick out of it for the first 4 or so hours. But for me, I don't think it's ever gonna go beyond that again. The combat has been lambasted for being too easy, which is a regurgitated point for most modern Square games. And if that's a criticism you have, that's fair. I'm not bothered by it, but to each their own. However, one of the reasons it's too easy, apparently, is that the game allows the player to hold the attack button. And I don't really see how this is a bad thing. Mind you, 2016 wasn't a great time for accessibility in games. However, 15 offered a decent amount of options between the active and wait battle modes, an easy mode that you could switch on the fly, as well as being able to simply hold the attack button. For anyone who's actually played the game, you'll know that that just doesn't make it easy. Parry times are still pretty short, and item management is still here like in every other RPG in existence. Sure, you could just stock on ethers and spam Warp Strike, but that's on you. What matters is that 15 has a decent amount of depth. Noctis can use any and every kind of weapon in the game, but each of them alters his stats. The Royal Arms are so overpowered, but all come with some sort of disadvantage. Mainly how long the animations are, or even draining Noctis's HP and MP bars. Sure, it differs heavily from other action RPGs, even in the Final Fantasy franchise, but once you get in the groove of managing your MP bar, dodging attacks, parrying, and even switching weapons on the fly, it's a really fun system. However, I will say that playing as the other members in the party is fucking broken. This was a feature promoted for Versus 13, but wasn't in 15 at launch. Only after fan outcry and the individual DLC episodes were released was it added to the game. The thing is, I think Square deadass just dragged and dropped the build from the DLCs into the main game. And those DLCs are sold entirely on being solo adventures with little to no party at all. So Gladio, Prompto, and especially Ignis are unbalanced as shit in the main game and can completely sweep even bosses on their own. I do appreciate that they have their own playstyles. Gladio is more of a hack and slash game, Prompto is a shooter, and Ignis is a black magician who's just also fast as shit. You could just spam attacks with Ignis and just win fast as hell. And Prompto's grenade, assault rifle, and rocket launcher refill very fast. So yeah, if you want to win, just upgrade it to where you can switch party members very early on in the game. I will say that I'm not too keen on the magic system in 15. In almost any RPG, when you gain a skill, it sticks with you permanently. Here you have to obtain magic flasks, which are permanent. You have to absorb elemental resources near camps, and craft them into skills that you can use. However, you can only use as much as you've collected, and on top of that, there's a very long cooldown when you use the magic. It kind of fucking sucks. The upside is that the system allows you to create different kinds of spells very early on in the game, like Heal Cast or Tri-Cast. I just wish that you were able to do that skill on top of having a standard system of obtaining magic and leveling it up over the course of the game. 15 is fun. It's fun to play, which is the most important for any game at all that's kind of self-explanatory. Most of the main missions are big action set pieces, all of which I really enjoyed replaying. Destroying the airships while in flight, escaping Titan, the fucking Warthog run near the late game, which I didn't expect at all, and the same goes for pretty much all the boss fights. The bosses in this game definitely focus on spectacle as opposed to difficulty. Save for Aranea or Ifrit, I can't think of many bosses that you fight regularly one-on-one in combat. But even after blocking Titan's foot time and time again, or seeing the Leviathan set piece over and over, the game is still able to get me hyped as fuck with Yoko Shimomura's soundtrack and the great performances from the main voice cast. Even the final boss with Ardyn was more spamming buttons and dodging rather than normal combat. None of these relied on obnoxious QuickTime events or ever went on for too long. Plus, they were all pretty spread out and felt earned as opposed to feeling like they were manufacturing excitement. There are some sections of the game I will always get bored of, like this forced stealth mission where if you're seen once, the entire thing starts over again from the beginning, or this mission later in the game after Ignis loses his eyesight and the rest of the party sort of stumbles behind the entire way. It seems very purposeful to make a point that the forward boys are at a difficult time after their loss of Luna and Alticia, but it's just not a fun portion of the game, and it's one I actively dread since you're forced to walk as slow as possible and basically lacking an entire party member since Ignis hasn't gotten used to his disability yet. However, if we're talking about not fun parts of 15, I can't go without mentioning Chapter 13. I don't think you understand. People hate Chapter 13, even die-hard fans. If you watch any video on 15 since its release, there's gonna be some commentary or jab at Chapter 13, and I'm here to say, fresh off of replaying it, it's not that bad. First of all, I understand that to get here, lots of patches were added to allow NOCTIS to run, since for some reason that's a feature that's removed whenever you're in a dungeon, as well as to make the Ring of the Lucy overpowered as fuck. It used to take forever to kill something, I do remember that vividly being a pain in my fucking ass. But now, with all the fixes and the patches installed, it's just sort of a tutorial section for the strongest weapon in the game, and a little bit boring design-wise. But it's no worse than the Sun-Lamp section in 7 Remake. That was way worse than this is. But with that being said, the alternate mission with Gladio is much better. Yes, this chapter was hated so much that the dev team made an entirely different mission for Gladio and Ignis, and it's much more enjoyable to play. Yeah, I wasn't lying earlier when I said that 15 got patched a lot. Some of these were fixes in response to player feedback, but majority were features that weren't there at launch, as a side effect of the team focusing on getting the game done and out of the door for its release date. An issue we've seen become more and more prevalent as time has gone on. But in the year of our Lord 2023, there's so much added stuff that it almost feels like a different game. And that's mostly due to the Royal Edition, something I've mentioned sparingly here or there. Royal Edition is Square's big definitive release of 15 that came out all the way back in 2018, right before more DLC was released. Why would you release a definitive edition of a game if you had more content planned? I don't know. I really fucking don't. Weird business decisions aside, Royal Edition adds a shit ton of stuff to 15. Oddly enough, most of it is an insomnia at the very end of the game. Mainly a much bigger city to explore with side missions and bosses, new story moments to tie into Comrades, which I will get to Comrades in the next video, oh my fucking gosh. A boat you can use to explore the sea, as well as a first-person mode. First-person feels very tacked on. It almost plays like a fan-made VR mod played without the headset. Like, weapons just float in the air, which is dumb. Really dumb. I do appreciate that it tries to not be disorienting by keeping the camera still, and even switching to third person during more action-heavy moments. Plus, it's useful for getting some nice looks at Eos, and I guess it's fine that it's here. I'm just not really sure who it's for. The boat is neat. I guess it adds some side missions that I'm probably never gonna fucking play at all. But the biggest additions are the additional story boss fights of Cerberus, as well as the fallen kings of Lucis, and they kind of make the final chapter less fun. Instead of being a short jaunt through Insomnia with 2 decently balanced boss fights that kind of pass by fast, you now have 6 fights, back to back to back. I will say, I appreciate how much was put into fleshing out the world after the time jump, and despite what I have to say about Comrades in the future, the expansion that everybody fucking ignores, I like that there is integration with both that as well as the Brotherhood anime of all things. I don't really mind the idea of a bigger city or new boss fights. The issue is that the boss fights are not balanced at all. On normal difficulty, you can tell blindfolded who was in the base game and who was added for difficulty's sake in Royal Edition. It also somewhat messes with the pacing in my opinion. I was fine with the original ending. It was short but sweet. The focus was on the satisfaction of defeating Ardyn, and the additions, while not outright bad, legitimately make me wish that there was some sort of toggle for Royal Edition bosses. I don't know, more content don't equal bad, but much like Persona or any other game that gets expanded with new additional story content, it's just different. Back when 15 was released, it was common to see a lot of hardcore fans, like a fuck ton of them, say that 15 isn't a good first Final Fantasy because it isn't like the other ones, mostly due to the open world and the action RPG combat. And even after games like Stranger of Paradise 7 Remake and even Final Fantasy 16 have been released, it's still not an uncommon thing to hear nowadays. But now that the mainline numbered games have officially moved on, there's a whole new crowd of people saying that Final Fantasy 16 or even 7 Remake are everything that 15 should have been, with comparison videos showing a semi-linear PS5 game from 2023 up next to an open world game from 2016 released on hardware from 2013. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm disrespecting people's opinions. I'm an American. It's a God-given right for people to be both wrong and loud. 15 is such a different game than what 16 is trying to be, that the two don't even cross over in my eyes. Like that's like saying, oh yeah, Stranger of Paradise is a much better sequel to Crisis Core than Final Fantasy 13 is. Like, that statement sounds just as sensible to me. Without even realizing, even I took part in this. In my review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I said that it took everything I loved about 15 and placed it in a game that's, quote, more in line with what people expect from Final Fantasy, end quote. And I gotta tell ya, after playing a mountain of other Final Fantasy games, as well as seeing the release of 16 firsthand, I've come to realize that there is no real Final Fantasy. I understand that the phrase, it's a good game but not a good blank game, is in reference to something that completely negates the soul of the original property. Like if Batman became a fucking serial killer. And that's not to say that you can't have your own personal idea of what a franchise or a series should be. However, with an entity like Final Fantasy, it's a completely different ballgame. There are only 16 mainline games that have been released in the past 36 years the franchise has existed. Hell, I'll make it more interesting and count direct sequels, bumping the number up to 20. And there are 40 spin-off games, not counting Kingdom Hearts, the Mana, or the Saga series at all. And I'm like 70% sure that I missed something else along the way. Any Final Fantasy has the ability to be someone's first game in the series. And with a franchise this big, that spans sub-series after sub-series, genre after genre, with credit for creating so many other culturally significant RPG series, there is no universal understanding of what Final Fantasy is, and there never will be. It's a natural side effect of all these damn games, and that's okay. The truth is, I don't fucking care what Final Fantasy is supposed to be. What comes with that realization is the freedom to choose, to enjoy what you like as your personal Final Fantasy. And to a lot of people, including myself, 15 is Final Fantasy. I wasn't alive in 1997 to play 7 in my buddy's dorm room in college, but I was alive in 2017, recovering from a minor surgery in my senior year of high school, and played 15 until I bawled at the ending at 3 AM in the morning. I remember downloading Florence and the Machine songs for 15 on my phone, and listening to them all the fucking time. I remember begging for a copy of Type 0 for Christmas, solely so I could play the episode Dusky demo, which I replayed time and time again, and being so overwhelmed with excitement for the full release that I made a terrible review of both episode Duske and the later released Platinum demo in 2016, predating any of the videos I deem good or even watchable. My love for this game knows no bounds. 15 is a testament to the statement that any game that's seen the light of day deserves some level of praise, because fuck is game development hard. That doesn't mean it's without its valid criticisms. Some of the additional content or gameplay systems feel very undercooked. Certain creative decisions make no fucking sense, like removing NOCTIS from the action in Insomnia in place of Square's third attempt at a Final Fantasy movie, and Square should have never treated its mainline Final Fantasy game as a live service title. I really don't think that you understand how much post-game content was made. This second video is gonna be fucking ridiculous. Also, I fucking hate the fishing minigame. I never mentioned it in the review because I never fucking played it after my first playthrough, and I've never regretted that choice. And with all of what I said in mind, 15 will always mean the world to me. It's the ending to the unofficial Tabata trilogy. It was my first Final Fantasy game that I ever rolled credits on, and it's still, after all of the games I've experienced in the 7 odd years since I first played this, or all the videos I've made since then, 15 is still a fun game. I understand that to a lot of people, this robbed them of verses. But if you're ever able to put the strenuous development aside, as well as the ridiculous business decisions from Square, I think you will find a flawed but great game. So it's been a while. Anyway, once Final Fantasy XV was released to the public in November of 2016 to pretty good reviews, that was only really the beginning of development on free updates to add new scenes or fulfill promises made in trailers, as well as the paid Season Pass DLC that was sold at launch, meant to expand on the characters. A common complaint, especially when these episodes were coming out, is that they should have been included in the game, some of which were insinuating that these were being cut out of the game and sold separately, which I know that that's not how games are developed for the most part. It also doesn't help that each episode got a little in-game advertisement in the original game, with each party member returning with some sort of scar from their off-screen travels. Also, season passes are just a bad PR thing all around. I'm glad that Square learned this and fixed it by the time they got to 7 Remake. But apparently Stranger of Paradise didn't get the fucking memo. That video is gonna be a headache. What initially started as just some extra content meant to appease fans quickly turned into an entire thing with its own development woes. Because nothing with Final Fantasy XV and its damn curse will ever be simple at this fucking point, and I don't know why I expect it to be anymore. Episode Gladiolus was the first piece of Final Fantasy XV DLC to be released, coming out only 3 months after the base game. I don't remember it being that soon. Of course, it and the rest of the advertised episodes were a part of the Season Pass, however you could buy them all separately for only $5, which is extremely fair. After replaying it for the first time in 7 years, I can easily say that episode Gladio isn't my favorite of the bunch at all, but it still manages to jam a lot of Final Fantasy-ness in the shortest runtime of them all, coming in at barely an hour. The story takes place during Chapter 7, and is all about Cor assisting Gladio in his journey to get stronger in order to be a better shield for NOCTIS. He wants to do this by seeking out Gilgamesh the Blade Master and beating his ass, and after treading through the ruins and single-handedly defeating an onslaught of mini-bosses, Gladio defeats Gilgamesh and brings back his weapon as a trophy. The end. Now, I'll say that overall the idea for this is neat. Using Gilgamesh as an in-universe legendary test of strength feels satisfying as a Final Fantasy fan, since he's infamously the most difficult boss in each respective incarnation. I like that the whole DLC is framed as a campfire story, making it all feel complementary to the main game, rather than some important moment that we all missed. I appreciate Cor's role as Gladio's mentor. He was a fan-favorite character in the original game that got too little screen time, but his role here, where he's constantly giving Gladio advice, as well as retelling stories of when he, Gladio's father, and King Regis were on their own journey, really amplifies the uncleness of his character. As a game, the entire DLC really is just one massive dungeon, which I think works in its favor. The areas explored in episode Gladio are much more visually striking and distinct than any of the dungeons I can think of in 15, which were all mostly just dark caverns riddled with mobs and confusing doors. While here, there's piles of bodies left behind showing how few were able to pass the trials that Gladio is attempting. There's lots of jagged terrain and glowing primary colors, making for a beautiful area that I wish was explorable in the main game. Episode Gladio is fittingly a bit more difficult than the original 15. Majority of your major fights are done completely solo. Instead of warp striking or phasing, Gladio can simply dodge and parry. He also doesn't level up either. So instead of campfires allowing you to get stronger, there's simply checkpoints for Gladio to catch his breath and eat cup noodles, because we need the advertisement, obviously. But Gladio can clearly hold this game on his own. He controls a bit closer to a character action game, especially with his additional ability to grab a pillar and start swinging it around at demons. It never failed to make me laugh. The final battle with Gilgamesh is a steep spike in difficulty I had to retry at least 3 times. However, since there's no XP or alternate gear, it's solely a test of skill, which fits the theme of the story. However, once you defeat Gilgamesh, have a short conversation, and he concedes his weapon, it all abruptly ends. And that's sort of why I appreciate episode Gladio, but I don't really love it, or even particularly like it a lot. Gladio's whole arc is about not feeling powerful enough after being stopped by Ravis. Feels a little bit of a cop-out reason for this entire story. This episode is the shortest of them all because it simply lacks any depth. The story is just about obtaining the power, and that's it. Which is a shame. I like the dungeon. I like the rock inspiration some of the backing tracks here have. I appreciate the additional content like a new game plus mode with Gilgamesh's blade, a score attack mode, which would be added into Final Fantasy XVI of all things, and the final trial against Kor is the hardest fight in all of Final Fantasy XV, hands down. But while in later episodes those all feel like great additional goodies, here it feels like it's trying to make up for how shallow this main story is. Gladio goes through no character change, no arc whatsoever, he just gets the thing that he wants. The end. Since these were released separately, when episode Gladio released in March of 2017, that was it for 15 until Prompto would release in June. And as much as I liked it when I first played it back then, it's not a great first impression for a $25 season pass. Looking at it now, separated from that initial excitement, it's good, it's fine, but you'll quickly come to see that it's the least ambitious of all of these episodes, and is frankly the one I thought about the least in the time since my initial playthrough. Episode Prompto is, in a lot of ways, a major step up from Gladio, and somehow a bit more frustrating than it with how safe Square ended up playing it. The story is set during Chapter 12, and is solely about Prompto figuring out his origin of being a cloned soldier from Niflheim. Aranea shows up to help him destroy both the scientists that made Prompto, as well as his new prototype form as a robot. After they double tap his dad, not in a fun way, Prompto decides to return to his best buds, only for Ardyn to capture him again, leading to his reappearance near the end of Chapter 13. The end. Criticisms of his dad barely being a character if you haven't seen the Kingsglaive movie aside, you can immediately see the jump in storytelling. Prompto is given the second longest episode, which makes sense since his absence and eventual reveal in the original game was the most glaring out of the main party. From being pushed off the train to showing up hours later right before the end of the game with this gigantic lore dump about being a bioengineered soldier who was originally meant to, infiltrate Lucis, and he figured it out off on screen, I don't fucking know. So episode Prompto, more than any other piece of DLC related to 15, is almost required to fill that missing piece of the puzzle. The imagery is not subtle at all, but I like that we at least get to see Prompto at his lowest point as he begins to figure out what it is that he wants in life. But it's Aranea's inclusion that feels a little bit off. I like her character. I have a crush on her. It makes sense why she would come to help Prompto after speaking to Noctis in Tenebrae, but it just doesn't feel right, you know? For some reason, she just feels a little bit shoehorned in here so that there can be another temporary party member from the original game. The ending is a little bit rushed here as well, and again, this entire character has one scene in the original game. It only gets 2 minutes on screen here, but we're supposed to feel connected to him because he made Prompto in a fucking lab. with a box of scraps. I do like what episode Prompto was going for. It's a little more out there than episode Gladio, especially with scenes like the Nightmare where you play as a Magitek soldier running away from Noctis. But I almost wish that stuff was expanded upon with this psychological horror twist. At certain points that almost feels like what some of the game was going for, but it's too set in this Metal Gear Solid recreation to get that weird. Only the AI isn't smart enough to notice that you're there, so the stealth just feels like a waste of time. However, as an action shooter, it plays fun enough. I enjoy the variety in Prompto's arsenal, as well as the ability to grab different weapons like a bazooka or an SMG. I was kind of wrong in my original Final Fantasy XV video when I said that the DLC builds were just dragged and dropped into the main game, at least when it came to Prompto. Like, 5% wrong. Here, instead of a bazooka, that fourth slot is taken up by a baton, which sucks. It makes no sense to have that when the revolver already has infinite ammo. Outside of the main story, there's the semi-open world of the tundra surrounding the Niflheim labs. It's not huge, but there's some side quests to do, all of which are really short and cut all the extra fluff so that they don't get in my way at all. You can upgrade your snowmobile with the parts you get from said side content, and once you complete a first run of the story, you unlock an additional weapon, a time trial mode, and a boss fight with Ardyn, which will pretty much become the norm for the rest of these episodes. Unlike any other DLC in this video, I do remember returning to episode Prompto after my initial playthrough to just drive around and beat some of the mini-bosses. Something that can't really be said for Gladio or Ignis. With as many gripes or complaints that I have with the story, episode Prompto felt less like more Final Fantasy XV and a bit closer to something that's in its own category. Although I still don't think that Square hit the nail on the head quite yet. Close, but no cigar. Comrades, or Multiplayer Expansion Comrades, was sold as the online co-op counterpart to 15. It's set 6 months into Noctis' 10-year rest while the world is overrun with demons. You play as a member of the Kingsglaive, here to redistribute power to all the different cities in Eos, as well as to save survivors and kill demons. That's about it. If you want more story, you'll be disappointed, as there's only about 30 or so minutes of it worth in a 20-hour game. Comrades takes the gameplay of 15 and shoves it into a Monster Hunter-esque experience, which is fine. I've just never seen a dev team Metal Gear survive their own project. But to start off with the positives, as a reskin of 15, the combat is fine. There are new mechanics like defensive and offensive spells, thank God, as well as some new weapons, which does give this game a bit of its own identity. The character creator is a bit bare bones in terms of base options like altering faces and hairstyles, many of which you have to buy throughout the game as style magazines, but once you obtain more hairstyles and clothes, the character creator is actually pretty in-depth. I do like the idea of the game. Seeing this period in time actually play out is interesting conceptually. Seeing characters like Iris and Calcut do their part to help the efforts makes us feel a lot more connected to the original game than just some throwaway spin-off. It is very obvious that this is just a recycle of 15 assets, but I appreciate that there was some more put into it. Except, I fucking hate this game. The gameplay loop of Comrades is this: complete a hunt, get power, redistribute power to connect to other outposts and obtain more quests, repeat until finished. It's a game that you play in the background at best, which is okay. Everything isn't going to be the most talented, most interesting, and most extraordinary game in the universe. The fact is, I'd be alright with Comrades if repetitive quests were my only issue. No, see, my biggest issue with Comrades is simply fucking playing it in 2024. The player base is a ghost town, and on console, you're still required to have PlayStation Plus or Xbox Live to play online, which you can only do if you're playing the standalone release. If you don't meet any of those parameters, you'll have to play with bots. Only the AI is brain dead. I've had many a situation where I'm completing a quest and lose right at the final stretch due to my team members simply not doing their part. And it's not like the quests in Comrades are all very short. Some of the beefier ones go for upwards of 10 minutes. All to do it over and probably fail again because you can't take on 20 demons on your own. Not to mention that leveling is slow, forcing you to replay many of the same quests in order to get to a higher level in the first place. In my 5 hours of playing Comrades, I've only gotten to level 6, in a game with a level cap of 50. That is fucking insane. Playing Comrades solo should be recognized by the United Nations as a form of torture, and I will stand on that hill. To make matters worse, at some point Square realized that having an entire multiplayer game sold only to those with a season pass is a terrible fucking idea, around the same time that they wanted to remove a lot of the online features from the base Final Fantasy XV. So Comrades was transitioned into a standalone game on all platforms for $20. That is, except for PC. The one platform where multiplayer is free, its servers are just offline. And if you are able to find some workaround, good fucking luck, Charlie, finding someone to actually play with. I'm sure that this got so confusing that people just gave up and played A Realm Reborn for free. I wish Comrades was developed more as a separate entity from the jump, maybe by a different dev team, as opposed to a red-headed stepchild that's just now been drowned in the backyard. This isn't like Final Fantasy XI or XIV, both of which offer entirely unique experiences. Comrades is kind of a lesser version of a game that I have already completed. Maybe if it was given more time in the oven or wasn't abandoned so fast, I'd give it a little bit more grace. But the reality is that this is the worst thing related to Final Fantasy XV and is completely worth skipping. Episode Ignis is paradoxically the one I remember the least, as well as the most iconic of the bunch solely for its ending, which I'll get to in due time. The story takes place during the fight with Leviathan in Chapter 9, and is about Ignis trying to find Noct and Altissia, all the while pushing back Niflheim's army. Eventually, Ravus joins him in search of Luna, only to find her lifeless body because, you know. Ravus turns on you because he's pissed off at Noct, and begins the best boss fight in the episode. Then, once he calms down, Ardyn shows up and almost kills Noctis. But Ignis puts on the Ring of the Loose Sea, a royal weapon that will kill those who it deems unworthy. When Ravus wore it in Kingsglaive, it took his arm, and when Ignis wears it, it takes his eyesight, thus explaining how Ignis went blind off-screen. Ignis protects Noct from Ardyn until the others get there, fulfilling his role as his protector. Ardyn disappears and Ravus leaves, and then the story goes on like it did in the original game. The end. You can tell that the devs realized that creating an entire 2-ish hour story solely around Ignis going blind seemed like kind of a weak idea. So instead, the episode becomes the most character-focused out of them all. If for some reason you were planning on only playing one episode, you should probably play episode Ignis. If you didn't already love his character in the original game, then you'll adore him by the end of this. And the same goes for Ravus. Not only does it allow a great character to finally get more screen time, but his inclusion adds to the tension. The shaky union that he makes with Ignis despite still resenting Noctis, only to completely snap once finding Luna's lifeless body, is so good. It adds a lot more to the story of the original, fleshing out both Ignis and Ravus as two people who would do what they must for those that they care about the most. The reveal that after Altissia, Ignis knew that Noctis would have to sacrifice himself by the end adds a new layer of beautiful tragedy to that game. Episode Ignis is just the perfect DLC for Final Fantasy XV, hands down. It manages to add a lot to the original game in a way that felt fitting. Seeing a set piece like Titan stopping Niflheim from an outside perspective is the exact sort of thing I wanted from these episodes. And finally being able to see Eos through Ignis's eyes is great. You know, and until he loses that. It also helps the combat and traversal here are pretty good. Ignis plays much more like a hack and slash game, with his elemental weapons functioning more like different battle stances. It's fine, although he zips around a little bit too much for my taste. Throughout the episode, Ignis will help the Altician forces on the front lines. There's a power balance meter that doesn't really do much but show when an area is controlled by Niflheim, and then it'll turn blue when you kill all the enemies in a specific part. That's really it. You're not required to save the entire city, there's no reward for defeating all of the Magitech soldiers, but running around the rooftops and ziplining into battles is probably the most fun I've had in Final Fantasy XV when it comes to traversal and random encounters. The scale of this episode is grand, to say the least. Lots of these moments in this relatively short runtime are big enough to rival the original game. The music here by Yasunori Mitsuda hits those highs with the operatic vocals that I didn't even know that I needed to hear, and the ending where Ignis has to watch Noctis, his friend he swore to protect, say his final goodbyes before they both know that he has to sacrifice himself is the exact sort of storytelling I love to see in Final Fantasy XV. What the fuck was 16-year-old world me smoking on, man. Maybe all those years ago I expected another giant open world with side missions, and that's why I didn't remember this one all that much. But again, episode Ignis is the best of the DLC episodes. It's no contest. And of course there's the extras like a bonus boss fight with NOCTIS, but you know what we're here for. The biggest thing in episode Ignis is its alternate ending. This is where 15 gets a little weird. You see, for some reason, once you complete the main story of this episode, there's a verse 2. Not unlike the additional chapter 13 that was patched into the original game. Except instead of playing as somebody else, here this verse 2 is a what if scenario. Since Ignis knows how all of this will end, he gets the choice between following his path in the original game, wearing the Ring of the Lucy and going blind, or playing along with Ardyn's plan and going to the crystal to act as bait for NOCTIS. When you go to the crystal, somehow the voice of Luna gives Ignis all of the information she has on Ardyn, how he was the original king and was betrayed, yada yada yada. Ignis tries to save NOCTIS from his fate by wearing the ring and sacrificing his life, giving him enough time to destroy Ardyn's physical body. NOCTIS then uses the ring to heal Ignis, and the game ends. During the credits, it's revealed that this new ending circumvents a lot of the big story beats from the latter half of 15 after Altissia. Ignis doesn't go blind, Ravis doesn't die, presumably Prompto never figures out that he's a soldier of Niflheim. I'm not too sure if that's a pro or a con. Noctis' 10-year slumber still occurs, but Eos was prepared for this thanks to Ignis' knowledge, so it's implied that a lot more people survived that decade-long gap than before. The final scene shows an alive Noctis ruling as king as he was somehow able to stop Ardyn without killing himself, as he and Ignis smile at each other. A happy ending in a Tabata game. I thought I'd never fucking see it. While this is all fine and dandy and offers some good fan service, it's not the best ending. It is all tied up a little too neatly in a bow. But the more important part is it makes you wonder, why now? Why randomly include an alternate ending in the final piece of 15's story? Well, as a Final Fantasy XV veteran who was there at launch, I think that Verse 2's sole purpose was to get the player base used to the idea of alternate endings. You see, episode Ignis was released in December of 2017 and was the final piece of DLC for the season pass. 3 episodes and Comrades are promised, and now 15 was complete, right? In your fucking dreams, loser! Episode Ignis would be the final piece of DLC for 15 up until Royal Edition released in March of 2018 with all its new stuff and additional ending, and that was sold as the big definitive edition. Except back at Square, the dev team, which were now its own subsidiary studio called Luminous Productions, were already planning on 4 new DLC episodes in a story titled Dawn of the Future to be released in spring of 2019, which also eventually got adapted into a book, and the entire concept behind both stories is an alternate ending where Bahamut is revealed to be the true evil mastermind behind everything, which I guess makes sense even in the original game. I haven't read the book myself, so at this point I'm just as lost as you are. The 4 episodes would be Ardyn, Luna, Armenea, and NOCTIS? Had these been completed, NOCTIS most likely would have been the new ending for the game as outlined in the novel, where everyone's alive and NOCTIS and Luna get married and everybody's happily ever after. Yippee. However, when Hajime Tabata left Square in October of 2018 to make his own development studio, and Square was actively losing money running Luminous, $33 million to be exact, they decided to pull the plug on the final 4 episodes to focus on other games. The curse strikes again. I know we got a little comfortable there, but we just had to be reminded and put back in our place by somebody who's fucking upset at Final Fantasy XV existing. The only DLC that was near completion at the time of cancellation was Ardyn, giving us the final piece of Final Fantasy XV for real this time. There's no feeling like skipping something that you don't think is going to be worth your time, only for it to become one of your new favorites. I mean it with my whole chest this time when I say that episode Ardyn is my favorite piece of Final Fantasy XV DLC. I'm sorry Ignis, you've been dethroned. It's the longest, coming in at a little over 2 hours, and manages to wrap a bow around the entire game in a way that I didn't even think was possible at this point. The story jumps all over the timeline. We see Ardyn's past as a healer 2,000 years before the original game, where his brother Somnus kills the first Oracle, Era, who looks just like Luna, and takes the throne for himself. But the majority of the game is set 30 years before the beginning of Final Fantasy XV, where Ardyn storms Insomnia to fight his brother Somnus, who, since he's a king of Lucis, is a super ghost thing, as well as a young King Regis. Only before Ardyn can kill Regis, he's taken away by Bahamut, who explains that Ardyn's role as a healer and a savior has now been rewritten to be a sacrifice. His place in the story is now to subject the world to 10 years of darkness in order for the true king, Noctis, to fulfill his prophecy, all in a big play that the gods wrote titled Hajime Tabata's Nightmares. By the end of the DLC, when Ardyn learns that he wasn't really betrayed 2,000 years ago, that both his fiancée Era and his brother Somnus knew what would happen to Ardyn and just played their role to fulfill his destiny, he spends his next years of slumber dreaming of killing them, having fully lost any semblance of sanity or humanity, only to then wake up, leading to Final Fantasy XV. I think episode Ardyn is the most tragic that 15 can get. Just the QTE where he tries to prevent Somnus from killing Era, only for it to be unbeatable, is amazing. Although I do think that giving Ardyn the goal of simply fulfilling his role in the god's grand plan, rather than most of his actions during the game being of his own free will, robs him of his agency a bit. And the more I learn about what the Dawn of the Future ending would have entailed, the more okay I am that it ended up not happening. Episode Ardyn's gameplay builds upon the framework of Episode Ignis, with the main character taking over different parts of the city as they work towards their main goal. Except here, that city is Insomnia, the one place that wasn't represented in the main game whatsoever, save for the ending. Finally being able to walk through an intact Insomnia is exactly what I asked for in my original review. The Shibuya inspirations are as clear as day here, and it's so beautiful to finally see it up close. While the city is empty because there's a fucking 30-foot tall pyro destroying shit, you can still see the amount of detail that the devs put into all the buildings. I really wish Noctis escaping Insomnia was still the opening of 15 so that we could see it at night the way it's meant to be seen, but I do appreciate it that this was added before 15 was completed. The city itself is dense with collectibles, destructive items, and shops to buy hats. 10 out of 10 game. The combat is a lot closer to Noctis, but Ardyn has some interesting tricks up his sleeve. Unlike the previous episodes, Ardyn can be upgraded in the Dissension menu as opposed to the Ascension menu. Having Ifrit be Ardyn's companion is genius, and once the two of them are fully upgraded, you're almost unstoppable on normal. Although the overall lack of enemy variety does get a little bit old. The royal guards posted around the city never really change or level up alongside you, and the Guardian mini-bosses are quite literally copied and pasted across the map. It also doesn't help that as DMC-esque as the vocal track is during the raid on Insomnia, it does get a bit grating hearing the same song loop every 2 minutes for an hour or so. But overall, my complaints with episode Ardyn are really minor. This episode really gives me everything else that I could have ever wanted from 15. Some great backstory, an explorable Insomnia, hats? However, I especially love how much the developers clearly wanted to give their respects to the original Versus 13. From Insomnia itself to the opening and this shot of King Regis and Ardyn, it's all taken straight from those initial teasers, and in a way, it feels like this ending is tying itself back into the beginning. Outside of a removed cliffhanger scene to set up the other cancelled DLC, episode Ardyn's story still works as a beautiful ending to 15. One that doubles down on torturing its characters, just like Tabata would have wanted. After this was released in April of 2019, and the Stadia port was released in November of the same year, another strike of the curse, Final Fantasy XV was finally laid to rest after 13 long years. How ironic. Final Fantasy would move on, and the dev team, Luminous Productions, would go on to make Forspoken. And that was fine, right? Wrong! The curse strikes again. This shit is relentless. I think Dawn of the Future not making it was ultimately for the better. Any amount of DLC or added scenes and chapters wouldn't fix the story of Final Fantasy XV. And that's not because it's fundamentally flawed or anything, again, I love the original game, but because our understanding of it was always changed and updated by subsequent material from the beginning. This isn't like Final Fantasies of yore like 7 or 10, where sequels and spin-offs would come years later. 15 was constantly being patched from day 0, but regardless of all that, the ending was always the one part that felt sound, at least to me. The first 3 episodes were fine, since save for promptos, they all felt like little extra goodies, but the issue I have is that trying to completely rewrite the ending feels a bit more revisionist than I think that the game needed. Again, the original conclusion is fine. It's tied to the themes of the story and is set up from the very beginning. An alternate ending is a neat idea, but it felt like the dev team's scope kind of got away from them. The tragedy was tied to the story, and after having listened and read synopses of what Dawn of the Future could have been, it would have felt like a completely different game. As much as I appreciate the sheer amount of work and dedication Luminous Productions did for the 3 years following 15's release, I don't want to see them attempt to offer something as drastic as a new ending if that was never in the plan from the beginning. Making reactionary decisions at the drop of a hat solely based off of fan feedback is one of the touchier parts of game development nowadays, especially when it comes to single-player story games like RPGs. And I think that sometimes in the pursuit of getting rid of all the game's kinks, that a project can eventually lose its identity. Rambling aside, 15 has died before, and despite being shut down before Tabata and his team's vision was fulfilled, I am glad that it ended in a way that felt fulfilling. The story is still beautifully tragic, the characters are still captivating, and as someone who's completed the game at 3 different points in time during its development, 15's narrative was heightened by almost all of the additions, and can now be laid to rest as one of my favorite Final Fantasy games with a lot of good DLC. Except for Comrades, fuck you. But now that Nomura is adapting pieces of Versus 13 into Kingdom Hearts, I think a part of 15 will always live on, whether we like it or not. Crossing my fingers that game doesn't succumb to the curse. Don't forget to share this on Rule 34.